Welcome to the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera, a celebration of Bill Hanna, Joe Barbera, and the thousands of people past and present who have shared in their entertainment tradition. And now your host, Greg Ehrbar.
Thank you, Chris Anthony. Welcome to the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera. And the "and" is there because it's about the "ands" as well as Hanna-Barbera. And today we're going to pay tribute in a loving, funny way to one of our dearest friends and most talented artists, did voices for Hanna-Barbera as well as many, many others, was Eugene on the long-running and still-running radio series Adventures in Odyssey, a musician, a composer, was a legendary Disney performer in the park, on stage, in parades, and also on many records. We're all going to share wonderful stories, and there are some funny stories. I'll start with he kept a lot of his paperwork in his oven. He never used it. That's just
Who are we talking about?
And who would that be? The glorious Will Ryan, ladies and gentlemen. I'll start with our newest guest, the wonderful, talented Diane Michelle.
Thank you. I'm very grateful that you included me in this tribute to Will Ryan. He was such a champion of my talent, and I know that he was that for many people. Will Ryan, I met through his sister Patty. Basically, I was doing some storyboarding for a song called Neptune's Tavern, and the artwork was being done at Patty's house near the Hollywood Bowl. And she goes, "You know my brother, right?" And I said, "Who's he?" She goes, "Well, he's in animation. You should meet him as Will Ryan." I said, "Well, I'd like to meet him." And so she put us together. And the next thing I know, I'm working with him on the Dumbo Circus show with Katie Leigh and Patty Paris and many others. I mean, really, it was like jumping in. I had been studying with Doss Butler, and he knew that. That was through another friend, my singing partner, Lori Johnson. Lori was a daughter of Paul Smith, who was Ella Fitzgerald's piano player, and so she knew a lot of industry people. And when I was able to get into Doss's workshop out of his garage, which was right down the street from me, we were living in Beverly Hills at the time, all of a sudden, I started getting calls from Hanna-Barbera. And I thought, well, that's interesting, but I never necessarily thought my teacher was putting in a good word, but I kind of like to think he did. But the very first job I got through Don Pitts, my agent, was to be a Greek tavern owner. And he goes, "Diane, you can do a Greek accent, right?" And I said, "Huh, of course I huh?" And so,
of course I can ride a horse.
And so I went to the San Pedro, where I am right now, where I grew up, Greek restaurants called Papategas.
Oh, it's all Greek down there, too.
This is way before internet. He goes, "We've got grape leaves, dolmas, baklava, moussaka." I said, "I think I got enough. Thank you." So I did my first Scooby-Doo the next day, and I managed to pull it off with...
Who was the character? I may have just watched that one.
Her name was Anna, the taverna owner. The Tony Blair scare. I still get residuals.
So by making us think the professor had turned to stone, they tried to scare us off the trail.
What do you mean, us, Anna?
This taverna is just my cover. I work for Greek secret intelligence. For years, we've been trying to capture Thaddeus Blimp.
Anyway, that's my sort of beginning. Will was, like I said, always writing songs. He wrote a whole album for me called Baba La Voom, Outer Space Detective. And I mean, basically, he just saw in me a potential that in this business, if you don't have a daddy or a mommy that, you know, can open some doors, you better get some relationship connections and, of course, have the talent to back it up. So that's what happened. And the next thing you know, there's a 43-year career as a Screen Actors Guild member with many, 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 many stories to tell along the way.
And speaking of Vava Lavoom, and maybe we can talk more about that, is that was a character in one of the pioneering online series.
Will said it was the first.
Annie Award for the first online. It was called Elmo Aardvark, Outer Space Detective, with Corey Burton doing that kind of old school announcer voice.
This is Elmo Aardvark, America's original animated star. Howdy. Semi-retired from motion pictures, Elmo lives a happy and peaceful existence.
Just me and my ukulele. A Kokomo, of course. My dog has fleas.
in a quiet little bungalow in the Hollywood Hills, where nothing ever happens. My dog has fleas. Great Danes and Dachshunds, what just landed in Elmo's backyard? Is he all right? And will he ever get that ukulele tuned? To find out, join us again next time for Elmo Aardvark, Outer Space Detective.
That's detective?
That remains to be seen.
Oh, I gotta get me a new announcer.
June Foray was on it, and Phil Lawler. Will played Elmo, of course. But out of that came an album of songs that he wrote specifically for her. But at any rate, it was a great experience.
And Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Leigh. Yeah, I've been in the business about the same amount of time Diane Michelle has. It's funny, but we met through Will, I guess, because I don't think I worked with you before. Well, on Dumbo Circus.
That's it.
I mean, Will championed everybody, so he was always trying to find just hire this person, and he'd get it done. And that whole thing where he had so many little pockets of friends, because I lived in the same apartment building as Eric Goldberg and his wife, Susan, at the time, and they were having, him and Tom Cito and Pat, they were having a party or a get-together. They had been working on the Ziggy cartoon that Will was voicing Ziggy. And I was just starting out in voiceover, and Eric said, well, you must know Will Ryan. Same thing, like Patty. No, I don't. I don't know hardly anybody. Go, come on over to the party. So we met, but then nothing really came of it till Dumbo Circus when we actually started working together. I really did not work with him until Dumbo Circus. The funny thing, I have our own Tell You Later show podcast, and Phil Barron came on, and Phil said, I was supposed to be Dumbo's voice until you showed up and auditioned for the cat when they said you read for it and gave the part to you. But yeah, so the Tell You Later show actually started with Will, his last year here on Earth. And that was really fun because we got to be together every week, pretty much.
And you were together for, 3 decades or so?
Quite a while, yes. Well, if you start with Dumbo Circus and then moved to Adventures in Odyssey, because we did Dumbo Circus for, a couple years, Diane?
Yeah.
And then pretty much that whole cast moved over to Adventures in Odyssey.
But I don't have any other friends. I have you and Connie, but I admire you, and all I do is argue with Connie.
That's not true.
See?
We worked on other things. The Gummy Bears, Adventures of the Gummy Bears together. Teddy Ruxpin. And I always forget. Nick, you're probably the same way. Like, I'd think of a couple things, and then as time goes, wait, and then there was this, and there was this, and there was this.
You keep adding and adding.
And he kept saying, I'm going to get you in a Biffle and Schuster. We keep thinking of skits, and you can be the secretary, but it never happened.
What a segue, because Elmo Aardvark, which Diane and Katie were doing, that was a fictional classic cartoon character that existed, way back when and had this great history. So you got to do all this retro animation with the great Daryl Van Sitters.
Yes.
Biffle and Schuster, they represented all these great decades of comedy, and they were this legendary team. Nick was the great Benny Biffle, who lives on in a fictional history on Nick's page.
Yes, he does. It's so funny. Hi, my name is Nick Santamaria, and my Facebook page continues the Biffle and Schuster legend. And they have fans that contribute to the story of Biffle and Schuster, and some of them are just gut-wrenchingly funny. Okay, I moved to Los Angeles the day after 9/11. My then girlfriend at the time and I got in our car and left Manhattan Island. We were the only car on the road. There was nothing but soldiers with automatic weapons standing everywhere, and they let us take the Verrazano Bridge off the island. And it was a terrible, terrible time. Anyway, we moved to Los Angeles, 2001. I got involved with the Disney company doing the Genie in Aladdin, a musical spectacular.
The first Genie, the first live action on stage. There was no other Genie but Robin Williams until you played him on stage.
Exactly, yes. And so cool. It is kind of cool. Anyway, to be compared to Robin Williams was like, wow.
Who are you? Who am I? I'm a Smurf with a thyroid problem. I'm a genie! Genie, say it with me. Genie. I knew you could. And you know what that means? You've got 3, count them. 3 wishes coming your way. But before we start, let's go over the genie rule book, shall we, sport? Rule number 1, no wishing for more wishes. It's against genie labor laws. Forget about it. Rule number 2, I can't make someone fall in love with you. Hey, lady! And rule number 3, I cannot raise the dead. You wouldn't believe the letters I get from Forest Lawn.
So that was a really great thing. And that was my Disney connection. So, okay, I'm living in Los Angeles. I'm doing the Disney thing. I get involved with Mel Brooks and the producers. I go out of town. I finally come back to town. It's about 2006. And I have nobody. I've been on the road all this time. My girlfriend and I are not together anymore. And I'm alone, basically. So I decide, one day I say, I'm going to take life into my own hands and I'm going to meet people that are like-minded so I can find a whole new group of friends. So I go to the Old Town Music Hall where Janet Klein is doing a concert. I had no idea who she was. I went. I loved the concert. At the end, people are lining up to say hello to Janet. So I got online to tell her how much I loved the show. And standing in front of me was Rusty Frank.
Yeah. Yay.
She's the premier tip tapper of all time. She wrote a great book about tap dancing. She travels all over the world giving workshops and everything. She's just wonderful. But this is the day I met her. And she turned around. She hit on me first, of course, but she said, honest to God. And I told her, no, I'm sorry. I'm still in love with my old girlfriend. I don't want to do that. But anyway, we're online and she starts picking my brain and she realizes that I'm one of us, Ubu Gaba, one of us. And she takes me up to Janet Klein and says, he's one of us. He's one of us. She starts introducing me to everybody. And the next day, the very next day, she invites me to her place in El Segundo. She's got a beautiful little craftsman house. It's gorgeous. And she says to me, I invited a friend of mine over. I want you to meet him. I think you guys would get on really well. And I was like, okay, whatever. So she says, he's a very nice guy. He's one of the most talented people I know and one of the biggest name droppers. So please give him a little space for that. And I was like, okay, I can handle that. That's fine. And it turned out to be true. But, I'm no slouch either. So we hit it off immediately. He had his ukulele with him.
Yeah.
I used Rusty's and we jammed together. We harmonized together. I did my trumpet with him as he played. And it was like love at first sight. Before you know it, Will was telling me, we should be a comedy team.
Yes.
And I'm like, what? First of all, I don't know anything about his voice work. So Will, to me, was Sammy Schuster from Biffle and Schuster. He was the straight man of the comedy team, which was very gracious of him to take that role. And we hit it off like gangbusters. It was amazing. And about 6 years later, our recently late friend, Michael Schlesinger, put together a short that we filmed, and then 5 more that we put on DVD, and it's out there on Amazon.com, The Misadventures of Biffle and Schuster. And Will and myself considered that, and no offense to either of you two, this was his favorite job, as well as my favorite job. In 50 years of show business, that was the best job we've ever had. We wanted to be Biffle and Schuster the rest of our lives. And I used to tease Will. I used to say, if you die, I'm going to have to hire a Curly Will, like the Stooges hired Curly Joe.
Curly Will.
Curly Will.
That's so funny. And it's so neat because, you guys covered all the things that, I don't know, what do you call it when you make up stuff and act like it's real? Is there a name for that?
Well, insanity.
And it's like faux historical stuff, but all the genre of music, the type of comedy, all the things that y'all loved, you actually got to do it not even just as a cartoon, but physically on camera.
Yeah. And I believe retro would be the word.
Yeah,
it's very retro,
And my friend, Perry Shields, from
I love Perry.
From church,
Perry's a good
and I
friend
kept
of mine.
saying, I know, but I kept saying, Perry, you've got to meet my friend, but he didn't know you then. I kept, you got to meet Nick and Will, these people that I know you would have a lot in common with, and somehow you all finally met, and he's in your Biffle and Schuster, and so is his wife, Cindy.
Mm-hmm. And actually, we were talking about this before you started, Greg. I was in a scene with Biffle and Schuster, and we did not rehearse. You remember that, Nick?
Mhm.
Had a run through it. I could see in Michael Schlesinger's eyes, like, oh, okay, this is going to work. And he grabbed the musicians and he grabbed the camera guys, and we did it again. And I mean it. It was like, for me, I tasted what you guys had. What you had told everyone was your favorite kind of showbiz. It's like being in a movie, being glamorous, being, able to shine on camera.
And funny.
I really haven't done much except that I am a live performer, but not on film. And I took my mom. Do you remember that, Katie? You were sitting near me, and you were too, Nick. And we climbed up to the top of the Egyptian theater seats.
Mm-hmm.
She's 96. She got to see me on the silver screen.
How fun is that? It's really a testament to, we're here talking about Will manifesting these things. Like some people would just say, wouldn't it be funny if he'd say, how can we let's just do it.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just
that
do
was
it.
Him.
I'm totally jealous because for years we talked about it because we need to do an act, him and me, like a Gracie Allen and George Burns thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about it and wrote some stuff, but it was luckily he had you to do Biffle and Schuster, and somehow Schlesinger, as you say,
Schlesinger,
yeah, who was able to somehow knew him and wanted to make it happen, which is so bizarre anyway that you would find a producer who would want to do something so classic. That's
yes.
the word too.
All right, classic, classic style of vintage comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In addition to that one, Katie, manifesting was really something he was good at, although he probably wouldn't have called it that. When I worked on the show Focus on the Family, he and I got to be he was becoming a regular, I was becoming a regular. And all of a sudden he said, this is not working for me, that we're not AFTRA, what your radio show would be. And so he included me in a group of people who stood up to the siren call of another job by saying, well, actually, I'd love to, but I can't because I feel we really need to change this to a AFTRA production.
Yeah.
And sure enough, he manifested.
He made it happen.
So that you and so many others, Trona and all these people he helped get gigs on that show, I felt really good about taking a stand, which, if you're going to be in a union, you might as well abide by the rules. And he was able to turn that ship around. I always give him credit.
Yeah, it was a way.
And Paul Herlinger, too, really stood with him.
Wasn't Eugene went to a monastery during that period? Or
I don't know where he went. I still haven't listened to those episodes. I don't know where he went. But, yeah, he basically didn't work on the show for 3 years until they made it happen because backed by popular demand, Eugene Melzner, and they figured it out. And it isn't that they didn't want to. I mean, ever since the beginning, we'd be bugging them, and then after didn't want to talk to them. But by his doing that, they made him have to figure out a way to do it because after wasn't really interested, really, to be honest, to be fair. They'd say, well, we base all our sales because we're kind of a in-between kind of a radio drama because in the beginning, Focus would just give the product away. Like, well, we're based on sales. Well, we're not. They're a ministry. So how do you figure this out? It was just a dilemma, but thank goodness they did figure it out. And I'm very thankful. And I confess I wasn't supporting his effort because I had just, been supporting Focus, frankly. But I am very thankful and admire what you all did. And I maybe feel bad I didn't help you do it quicker.
I think it's important for people listening who aren't familiar with Adventures in Odyssey to understand what a strange and wonderful hybrid it is. First of all, it's called a radio drama, but there's a ton of comedy. I mean, Will was in it.
And music,
And music. And it's a dramedy, but it's also a science fiction. It's satire. They do Star Trek takeoffs. They do the Novacom thing, which was a running story that was about the...
Which is like almost real now in real life. The whole science fiction part of it is not far-fetched anymore.
It was about an invasive thing that came into people's home. It was. But they do that kind of story. But even though it falls under inspirational, the people who write and produce it want this show to be the top drawer that it is, so it is recorded at the finest studios in Hollywood with the cream. Janet Waldo, Alan Young, Hal Smith, June Foray, everybody who was anybody in voice acting was on the show.
Charlie Granger, Debbie Reynolds, Peggy Levine, all of them.
Miriam Hopkins. Oh.
Miriam Hopkins.
You know what? If they were breathing, Will got them on the show, okay?
But only if they were
even
breathing.
if they weren't, they might have got honorable mention.
Well, it depends on their breath. I do want to bring up one thing that Will actually manifested for me and became a career. One day I got a phone call and he said, Dan Weinstein, his bass player, couldn't make it to a recording. They were doing a half-hour pilot show of Will Ryan and the Cactus County Cowboys, which was his Westerns band, and they were wonderful.
It's Cowboy Skiffle.
Yeah, Cowboy Skiffle. I had that for breakfast, I believe.
Yeah.
But he calls me up. I'm going to play the part that Dan is to play. So I was his sidekick, Westy.
Oh, yeah. And he had a real Westy.
Yeah, right? Westy was very ill.
Yeah.
And eventually he left us.
Westy Westenhofer. I
get to the studio and I'm playing against June Foray.
Yep.
Now my head's about to explode and I'm like, this is the most amazing thing ever. So we finished the show and the producer comes up to me afterwards and says, I like your voice. He goes, have you ever done audiobooks? I said, no, I've always wanted to, but yeah. He goes, I'm going to call you tomorrow. 10 years later, I've done over 300 audiobooks.
Wow. Wow.
Thanks to Will Ryan.
Yes, he opened that door. Yeah. And John Reynolds.
John Presto Reynolds.
And Katie Cavera. And the character he used to have me do was Ruby of Plum and Ruby.
Plum and Ruby.
Yeah, they were a character duo similar to, I guess, Gracie and Burns. It was kind of a, well, thanks for listening, that kind of thing.
It was funny. It was funny.
He wrote songs for them, too. But, Katie, don't you remember a lot of rehearsing with Will? If you were to do a show with him, a lot of practice and rehearsing?
No, not at all, because I didn't sing and I don't sing well, so that's just taken for granted. There isn't, a lot of hope there. But I did play Iphigenia Pentameter when they were doing a show in Altadena. And because I need an MC for the show, I could do that. Well, it's okay. I have so-and-so. I think he was going to have Phil Proctor do it. And he says to me one day, oh, Phil can't do it. Well, I'll do it. It's okay. I have somebody else lined up. Finally, the second guy couldn't do it. He goes, okay, do you want to do it? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So, but it was pretty much improvised. He had written this long speech originally for Phil or the other comedian that he was friends with, I think. Phil might have been the second choice. So he had this big speech about the Cowboy Poetry and Music Festival, and it was pretty much improvised.
This afternoon, our city is honored to have performing within its borders none other than the king of the radio cowboys, the official singing cowboy of Hollywood, the buckaroo who put the bow in bodacious, the wang in twang, and the overalls in Mrs. Murphy's chowder. Will Ryan,
Rhythm rides the range. Rhythm rides the range. They truck and wave along the trail, 'cause rhythm rides the range. Oh, rhythm rides the range. Rhythm rides the range. Cattle move in time for you, 'cause rhythm rides the range. Oh, the prairie's ringing, guitars are swinging, cowpokes are slinging, syncopated singing. Rhythm rides the range, yeah. Rhythm rides the range. Your horses have to do every step, 'cause rhythm rides the range.
I was there that night. One thing about Will, and this is where I came in handy. Will was very, as a writer, now I'm a writer, I can say this, he was very long-winded. He could have said things in my job was to whittle it down. So it wasn't like a class, it wasn't like an instructional class. That's what it seemed like. Yeah, he was definitely quite vociferous when it came to those kind of things.
Well, anybody who received an email from him can testify.
I know. I mean, just hearing these names, you guys, these names, Rusty and John. And
is John still around?
Yeah,
He moved,
he's
right?
still playing with Janet Klein, in fact.
Amazing talent. And because Will was so much fun to work with, he amassed the best players.
John was the best ever. He was fantastic. He was one of the greatest jazz guitarists I've ever seen or heard.
He used Larry Getz. Remember, he had a studio out on Robertson Boulevard.
Wasn't John Reynolds the grandson of Zesu, as Will would remind you?
Zesu
Pitts.
Zesu Pitts. Yes, he was the grandchild, and if you take the mustache away, it's the face. We would talk about his grandmother, and he was very honest about her. Zesu was a John Birch Society member.
Oh,
and not someone I would hang out with, let's put it that way. And he knew, he was well aware of it.
People listening don't know she was the inspiration for olive oil.
That's right. That's absolutely true.
Yeah,
oh dear, oh me, oh Papa. Yeah. She was delightful on screen. She was wonderful on screen, you know.
Let's talk about how many old timers he loved. Do you know what I mean? Like, he put me in touch with the guy who was the voice in Disneyland, Thurl Ravenscroft. Was that his name?
Yeah, you met him?
Yeah.
He was Tony the Tiger.
Yeah, and from the Haunted Mansion.
Yeah.
And I mean, just that kind, or the tap dancing gal, I can't think of her name.
Miriam.
Yes, Miriam.
Oh, Miriam Nelson was one of my best friends.
Oh, that's it. That's it. He loved to champion them too, because he was in awe of what they had accomplished. And he didn't want the world to forget them while they were still around. I love that. I love that nature that he had of sweet consideration. I mean, we can say that he was also a hoarder. He had so much stuff in his house. And we would go and rehearse and barely find the keys. And then he had a secretary who had like smoke coming out of her ears. And when we went to New York one time, he was buying engravings from in New Yorker and this building I had never even heard of. And I said, Will, how many are you going to get? He goes, oh, I don't think I'll get here again. And he just bought them. Where they went, probably a drawer.
I mean, he really lived like it was the 1940s. Like, who do you know who has someone write their checks for them? You know, it's just, he'd rather pay somebody to do that stuff or ignore it. I believe his answering machine stopped taking messages 20 years before he passed away. He just didn't clear it, didn't answer it, didn't want the phone to ring. He managed to do all this stuff, to his credit, without a cell phone, basically. He'd have one maybe for a week or two and lose it. And, you know, or forget how to open it. So that happened, no cell phone, but just answering the phone. And we used to do Comic-Cons together. So Neri, who he got very close to, our Comic-Con agent, Neri Lemus, and so we joke because when he'll call me, I'll say, telephone, because that's how Will would answer the phone. Like, I don't know where they came from, but telephone. Did he ever call you and try to disguise his voice?
Yes.
Like you didn't know who he was?
Yes. And then he
Not that so much.
No?
Sign off with pal, to my pal. I love that. That's so old school.
Yeah.
My old pal.
My old pal. We talked practically every morning on the phone. If we weren't together, we talked every morning. The last 15 years of his life, we were always together. I can't tell you how many meals we shared. I can't tell you how many great conversations, how many wonderful things we watched. He was incredible. He was just incredible. I remember the first words he said to me. I said, "Hi, my name is Nick Santa Maria." And he shook my hand and he went, "Hi, I'm Will Ryan, and I can't get you voice work." Because that's what everyone would ask him. I wasn't going to. He just assumed because I was an actor that I would ask him.
He had me on that. He roped me into some of those with the acolytes, the ones that wanted to learn the trade, the craft. And he was so giving, but he had to draw the line. So that's a funny opening line to somebody.
That's it. He nipped it in the bud.
Yeah.
Which was great because that was the beginning of our friendship. You know?
We used to get requested to do podcasts, you know, that had to do with Adventures in Odyssey mainly. And I say, well, of course, because they could contact me, he was a lot harder to get a hold of. So everything would come through me. And I'd say, so so-and-so wants to do, a podcast. And he'd go, oh, it always started with, okay, but just how long? Just 30 minutes. I'd say, okay, fine. And then he would talk for an hour and a half. I'd just say, okay, fine, whatever you say, because I knew once he started talking, and then we'd get off and say, those were such nice people. But he was always afraid that something bad was going to happen. I just say, go with whatever he said. Yeah, okay, don't worry about it.
He was not even with an agent. He fired his agent or he left his agent. He didn't want the phone to ring unless he wanted to call. I heard from one casting person once that the reason that he wasn't getting called in for their house as much was because they couldn't reach him.
I hope you told him that, because he would complain about not having work. I'm like, well, dude, you might want to be a little more available.
Right.
True.
Connected, yeah.
It's funny. In order to be in the business now, in modern days, you have to have the modern tools.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. And he just would not accept that. It wasn't in his makeup. What about his car? He eventually got so tired of paying insurance rates, monthly payments on a car, whatever. He started renting a car every week. He would go back to the same place and rent the car and drive it for the week, go back, rent it again, drive it for the week.
Some weeks he didn't need the car, so he would just, when he needed it, he'd just rent it. Yeah, but it probably was more efficient.
I did the math on it, and he was saving money.
I bet he was.
Yeah. So we were the dumb ones. I think this should be balanced. There was another side to Will. I've seen him sabotage things when he wasn't happy, right? We did a podcast once for some friends. I mean, these are people we liked. He resented the fact that we weren't getting paid. He was very big on that. He believed not only getting paid, but he always...
Artist, yeah.
So that was big with him. And this did not sit right with him. When I listen to this podcast now, which I can't do very often because it's unpleasant, he is sabotaging it from the first minute to the last minute.
I bet what you mean by sabotaging, because I think I've experienced it, where he never really answered a question.
And would go off on flights of fancy and talk over people and pick up his ukulele and just start playing while someone else is talking. I could see the little kid in him.
Yeah.
Impish. I think it was Greg wrote, who, by the way, Greg, you are part of this conversation. Hello. He's still there.
I woke
you
up.
wrote the most succinct and eloquent, clear, all-encompassing, not obituary, but what do you call it? What?
Epitaph?
For remembrance.
Yeah, his column about Will, and you covered so many things, but I think it was you who used the word impish,
Yeah.
and he was.
I used cherubic.
Oh, he was cherubic.
A naughty cherub.
Yeah.
I knew Will since Tim Hollis and I wrote Mousetracks, the story of Walt Disney Records. And
I remember when that came out.
yeah, now on audio. 20 years later, it's on audio, fresh, but preserved as it naturally was written, which I find wonderful because, we'd have to say Will Ryan passed away. It would be more sad, and that book's a celebration. Will and I, kindred spirits, started, right in as if we'd known each other forever, just like you guys. And we'd talk when I could reach him or when he felt like calling, same thing. And then when I moved out here 10 years ago, you come out to a place and you find kindred spirits that turn out to be that, and some that turn out to be like, I'm the kindred spirit, you're not the kindred. I know this, you don't, that kind of thing. And that kind of thing. And there's a difference. So I was kind of surprised by that, but delighted to find people like you guys. And I did meet you, Diane, at a marathon, Will, lunch that turned into dinner. Because we would always go to this place in Santa Monica, Earth, Wind, and Flower.
Yeah.
And he'd come in with his fedora, rakishly, arranged. And we would not come up for air throughout the whole. And they knew Will, so they didn't mind. If it got busy, we'd say, we better stop so they can have the table. But it was glorious. And
he always wanted the number of the table. He would walk in, he would ask the waitress, what number is this table? In her station, he would have to know the number of the table. That's just one of his quirks.
Yeah. And the sharing of the disappointments and the highs and the lows of all of that, Will, he really, I'll put it this way. When we thought about leaving, because there were times when it was very hard, one of several reasons, and there were several, not hundreds, but several reasons, I just couldn't bring myself to it, is I wouldn't be able to spend time with Will because that's how much it became part of it. Before I knew him, he was Eugene too. And when he started talking, he would say, it is as follows. He would speak, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's Eugene. I worked with Dave Madden on a commercial, and he was very proud of playing Bernard, the squeegee-wielding window washer.
I have a third cousin whose maiden name was Mushnick. Yeah, Martha was her first name.
When researching my genealogy, I recall coming across a great aunt named Martha Mushnick.
No. I know what you're thinking.
The world no longer makes sense. Today, Bernard Walton beats me at chess. Tomorrow, the Earth will revolve around the sun.
The Earth does revolve around the sun, Eugene.
Dave Madden, he added an edge. See, the thing about Odyssey is it has an edge to it, and it rarely gets too pontificating. It occasionally does, but mostly it's about the people and by example. It's not like sledgehammery. It's not Jim and Tammy. It's not that. And Will, people who are on the show are not necessarily of all the same faith or any. That's another thing. So Will and I would meet whenever, and in Florida sometimes. I'm going to be in Florida. It's like, okay. Or I'm going to be at the Disney studio seeing Walt's office. You want to come? And it's like, wow, And I'm sure you each have a story. He would say, I'm going to be having lunch with Anne Jeffries today. Do you want?
Annie.
Yes.
Annie used to wear this yellow and white outfit constantly. She wore it all the time. And I'd tell her every time I saw her, I'd say, Annie, you look like a broken egg.
Greg, can I pick up on that little tale?
Yes.
You said his words so much. Hey, you wanna? He's such a boy. And so one time he didn't say, hey, you wanna? He knocked on my door. I had gotten a gig in New York doing an animatronics voice for Atlantic City. And he knocked on the door of the hotel. I wasn't expecting him, but he knew I was going to be there. And so the first words out of his mouth were, I asked Charles. That's my husband. I asked Charles. And the funniest thing was that this was a hoity-toity hotel, the Soho Grand, and they had little fish in the fish bowls at the front desk. So if you wanted to calm yourself through the night or before you went to sleep, you could choose a goldfish. And I'll never forget, he's carrying that because they upgraded us to 2 beds, and he's walking in the hallway with this sloshing goldfish. I'll just never forget that picture of Will.
Well, he did come from a hippie background, I would say, in a way that, or even beatnik. He was not unfamiliar with couch surfing.
Yeah.
And wherever he could stay with people and save money, but he did manage to save a lot of money. Of course, and he needed it to buy all his tchotchkes and memorabilia and stuff. He could travel around and find people to stay with. And even when he was working at Henson's,
The Wobulous World of Dr.
Yeah, The Wobulous World of Dr. Seuss. He wrote that show. And for weeks, I think, where are you? He would just be staying in different people's apartments. And it was weird because he was working there. He actually had a gig. And I got to meet him there in New York. My sister had invited me to come to New York, and he was working there at the time. So I said, oh, great, we get to see each other. And I think we went to the Empire State Building together. And so funny because we were walking down the street, I don't know, the intersection, and there's Phil Proctor. We bumped into him while we were there. I think Will just attracted that kind of stuff. But yeah, he wrote for that too. I don't think we mentioned it. That was a big deal.
He was very proud.
He wrote songs.
Yeah.
He was also serious in theater in New York at like one of the workshops, because he told me once that there were some people later when he was working more in Hollywood, and there's this sort of like, well, we're with this theater kind of thing. And he said, well, I was actually with that same group, same workshop, get over yourself.
That's funny. Yeah.
I love too, and I may have seen Diane there as well in Altadena, and my heart goes out to Altadena because they just got the fires. And you guys would put on these shows, and John Reynolds was there, and there would be guest stars, there'd be radio shows, there'd be participation, and it was this nice intimate setting. It was like stepping back.
It's the Coffee Gallery West.
That's it. That was the most fun. In fact, You know, it's so weird that Michael Schlesinger passed away. The two connections I have to the Biffle and Schuster world.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's just so weird to be the last man standing, you know, holding on to all of this. It was an amazing experience. And even to do the live shows, like Will would be on stage singing April Showers. I'd be running around the audience with spray bottles, you know.
Yes.
You know, it was that kind of a thing. It was Olsen and Johnson. It was crazy. But we had so much fun. And Bob Stain, I have to say, he was the one who ran the Coffee Gallery backstage. Before that, one of my favorite comedy clubs, the Ice House in Pasadena. And Bob loved us. He used to book us whenever we wanted.
I'm sure he was like, whatever you want, Will. Just tell me when it is. We'll do it.
Will passed away.
We were a team.
I was trying to think of who would want to be informed, and I called Bob. And I guess I was the first person. It was only a day later. But I didn't know Bob that well, but I had performed in that club a few times. And I just said, I don't know if you've heard, but we lost Will. And he was struck, you know, as we all were. But I never spoke to him after that. But he was one of the few people that I thought, well, you know, maybe he won't hear it. He just won't hear from Will, and then he'll hear it through the grapevine.
Mm-hmm. And he retired not long after.
Really?
He closed up the place.
Maybe he just kept it going for that. Who knows? Well, he was working. Nobody knew, right, Nick? I mean, he was on the phone, making phone calls, drawing pictures from his hospital bed.
Yeah, those Coffee Gallery days were fantastic.
I feel the same, and I know that his ability to find a room like that had great sound. I mean, it wasn't a schlocky place. It was known for its sound.
Intimate, good comedy room.
We were at June Foray's birthday there, and she was turning 98, I believe. He got on stage. He had her doing stuff. And you know, this is between us, but now it's going out into the world. She never considered herself a great singer. So she was brave to get up there. Number one, at 98. And number two, because she didn't really think she was all that as a singer. She could do it. But Will would always give her those kinds of encouragements. That's June Foray being vulnerable. And I witnessed it through Will. You know, that speaks volumes to who the greats are.
Very early on, Will invited me to breakfast at a place in the San Fernando Valley. And there sitting at the table is Will Ryan, John Zachary, the horror movie host, and Chuck McCann, who was my childhood idol. He didn't tell me they were going to be there. You could just imagine. And I walked in, I saw that table, and it was like, you know, it was crazy. So that's what Will manifested.
You know, you mentioned, Nick, about the I guess, petulant side of Will on that show. I did a couple of co-interviews with you guys, with Ed Robertson, promoting the Biffle and Schuster DVD, which, by the way, folks, get the DVD. You can stream it in a lot of places as a feature linked together. If you want to see the linked together segments, it's like watching Huckleberry Hound, you know, with the linked togethers. But the DVD is a treasure trove of the films as individuals, and they resemble so closely the years they're supposed to represent that it has fooled audiences into thinking they were watching real ones. But what you also get is many bonus features, and I was on the floor for the film.
Those are the funniest parts.
It's a frame up. It's just this ongoing, you guys coming up with things to say, and it goes on. I mean, was unbelievable. So if you want value, it's really worth ordering.
Well, I always described Will as someone who wandered off the set of the 1950s sitcom.
Yeah, good one. Yeah.
That was Will. Will lived in that world. He
I
lived in
remember
Ozzie and Harriet.
He didn't use bad words.
Well,
he never swore. He never swore.
he never did. But
he never drank.
On,
he never smoked. He never swore.
When he went on the show with Ed and I, first of all, it was Ed's birthday the first time, and I've never seen Ed laugh so hard that he couldn't breathe.
We had so much fun that day.
And you guys came back. This was not an issue with Will holding back. And this was a personal thing to me. He said, Greg, did you have a record as a kid of Alice in Wonderland with this song, How Do You Do, Little? I'm like, Will, it was like one of my first records. It was like one of my most important. I can't believe you brought up this cricket record made in like the 50s.
How do you do, little Alice? How do you do today? We're glad to know you, Alice. have a cup of tea, and then we'll all go out and play.
And so the two of us started singing it, and then you guys sang it on the show. And it was like, how does Will do that? You know, how do you guys know? But people ask me that too sometimes. How do you know these things? We know because we love.
Yeah, true that. True
It's
that.
true.
It's your childhood. I've often wondered about Will's childhood. He never said, oh, my mom, I got to call her. Oh, my dad. He talked about his grandfather, but I always wondered why he wasn't more, even if they weren't alive, if he didn't give some kind of praise, or they turned me on to the Cinderella records or whatever.
After he died, I had no idea he had a brother. I knew him for 15 years, and I had no idea he had a brother.
Diane and I knew George.
I knew George and Patty and Marcia.
His normal sister, Marcia. He'd say, and that's my normal sister, Marcia.
I knew Patty. By contrast, I knew Patty.
I got to meet Marcia, of course, when she came out. We got to know each other a bit. And he was a vegetarian. That was like his famous meal he'd ordered in a restaurant: water with lemon and a side of jalapenos. Like, okay, that's not food, but he'll help you eat yours. Anyway,
yeah.
But Marcia said, you know, it's interesting because speaking of his childhood, she said when he was a teenager, he made my mom make him a hamburger every night for dinner. That's what he liked to eat. Well, it sounded like another habitual thing. When he ate meat, it's like, I don't care what you all are eating. I want to, and his mom would do it for him.
Good to hear, because I wasn't sure, you know, if it was a rough kind of an upbringing. I just speculate. I never knew.
He helped work on his grandfather's farm in the summer.
I heard that later. He never talked about it.
Who knows? Who knows what makes us strange birds? You know, it's some strange childhood. No offense to your mom if she's listening.
I remember him going over to Europe, and he was on a diet at the time, which of course he had ups and downs.
Ups and downs.
And he said, my grandfather always talked about these pretzels. And he said, if you ever get to Germany, you have to have the pretzels. But he was on a diet, and he didn't do it. And I thought, wow. Two things I thought. One, I can relate because, like, you know, if you take something that you're telling yourself you're not going to do, then you open the floodgates again. But the other was, you're in Europe. You're not going to get back to this town. And he didn't have them. That took a lot of willpower.
Yeah. Willpower. No.
Willpower.
Willpower. It's now. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Do you think maybe it has to do with Will was always kind of his own person, almost a self-created person, and it was that different drum he marched to? So, I mean, Nick and I were talking about this before we started. When you like not the mainstream and not the things everybody else likes, and you have your personal, like, I love the McGilla Gorilla Show, you know, who am I going to talk to about that? You know, that kind of thing.
Peebles.
You eventually find, like the Mama Cass song goes, you know, I discovered some others like me. That must have been part of why Will was such a creation of Will.
That's a good way to say it.
I think that's a great theory, honestly, because he was like no one else.
Right. He owned it.
He was a complete original, right?
Yes, he was. And he produced, you guys. I mean, even when he didn't have to produce an album per year, a CD, I remember him being part of the Academy Award nominating. He was a member of the Academy.
Yeah, the Academy would vote in the animation department. He was a prolific producer and a really bad marketer.
Exactly.
He was not a businessman.
No, but he always showed up on time and in tune.
And he always paid. He always paid.
He always paid people. And with a Vava La Voom album, we were in a studio where poor Larry Getz, Will would drive him crazy because Will would say to me, well, try it this way. You want to try it that way? And I mean, of course, I'm having a grand time, but poor Larry's looking at the clock and knowing Will has to pay. That part wasn't so.
Speaking of the marketing, there was an impressive line of Biffle and Schuster products as well as Elmo Aardvark products. You sometimes had to go to one of the live shows to get the comic books, the guide to life and stuff. You can watch Elmo Aardvark, I'm sure, to this day on YouTube.
The comic book compendium, which is all the comic books in one, that's still for sale on Amazon, I believe.
So you can access that.
Yeah.
But there was a Eugene Sings CD. There was a Christmas Odyssey one. Apparently there was a vinyl album, which I have no idea where that is. But a lot of those things can still be accessed. The Elmo Aardvark products, good luck. And then the Swaro Sisters and Will Ryan and the Cactus County Cowboys, those CDs, I don't know if Nancy Naparco, who's his widow, if she still is making them available, but they're so good. All of these CDs, they're not just...
Oh, they're excellent.
And they're original.
Our book, Adventures in Oddity, you can get on Amazon, and I still have a couple autographed ones with his autograph to sell. But the audio version of Adventures in Oddity, the book we did, is available. Will would say, but get the MP3, it has more music than the book. And we're not really exactly following it word for word, so it's kind of fun to listen to.
So I'll do the Peter Marshall thing from Hollywood Squares and sum up everybody's thing, and then you can augment that. Okay, Nick, you're doing the not missable Abbott and Costello Meet the Podcast. You also have the annotated Abbott and Costello book, which is so fun to read, especially if you watch the movie and read the chapters. But even if you never saw these films, terrific book. And also teaching, keep on his page because you'll find out where he's teaching online classes about every aspect of comedy. Katie, you have Tell You Later, which is still going strong. And the Scrubulators, I'll tell you, we use them every day.
Will came up with that name. They're kitchen scrubbies I crochet. He called them Scrubulators.
They work beautifully,
They do.
seriously. And Diane, what can we talk about?
The Elmo Aardvark, that's available on Amazon and I think even on his website. And then if you feel like checking out what else, then I'm sure the Vava Lavoom album is out there available as well.
Are you performing still? Singing?
Yeah, I'm actually going to Norway at the end of this month to sing in Sagvåg, Norway.
Wow. Song of Norway.
Sagvåg.
It's my way or Norway. Yeah.
It's a long way to go. But yeah, thanks for asking. And I do jazz. So go to DianeMichelle.com. You'll see it all.
Diane, I love your voice, by the way. Will gave me your CD years ago, and it stayed in my CD player for a long time.
Well,
she did like an Andrew Sisters
the
group called the Goyles. Yeah.
And then my daughter, I was going to give one little more plug to Will for when she was 3, he had her singing, Ich das nicht dein Elmo. Yeah, das ist Elmo. Yeah, she had to learn that German. He just championed her, and she got into voiceover at an early age.
Championed, manipulated, coerced, same
manifested.
Thing. Yeah.
A life well lived is somebody who has touched so many souls and tried to add more to that.
Yes.
You said something to me, Katie, that I repeat. You talked about circulating in the business and things happening. You said, make a friend, be a friend. That's the formula. Don't run up to people, like they were doing with Will. Just know people and be nice and all that. And it's just the most perfect rule. And that was Will. And each one of you has done such marvelous, I'm going to get verklempt. And I'm so glad that I'm telling you, I still think of Will all the time. And I know you guys do every so often.
He's with me every day.
Exactly. And so thank you all. And we'll all be talking again. And Will, I know a shout out to Nancy, Michael Schlesinger, and to Phil Barron. And if I missed anyone, as Red Skelton would say, good night, Imigorbe.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you, Greg.
Thank you all for listening. But until next time, bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the fantastic world of Hanna-Barbera with Greg Ehrbar. Please join us again, and many thanks for listening.